How's it going, guys? Happy Sunday afternoon, or Sunday evening more likely. It's Casey here with the Coyote Works channel. Looks like everything's working good, but somebody shoot up a comment if the audio if there's any issues or anything like that. My software says everything's going good over here, but I'm still a little new to this using the open broadcasting system. One thing is, there's a little bit of a delay between me and my screen that I'm watching over here that has my stream on it. So I'm going to try actually to not look at that so I don't get too distracted. Get my notes up here. All right, who we got going on here? It looks like we've got Kinder Stern from Sisters, George from Southwest Idaho Overlanding, Stephen Peterson made it. My buddy Don, Tex-Pat, Raptor Don, awesome. Doug Carr, Sarah and Nick, long time no see. I just met up with Sarah and Nick on Friday out here in my neck of the woods. They came down to get their new rooftop tent from Free Spirit Recreation. So, Tucker's on there. Good to see you, man. I saw your Instagram message, Tucker. I just didn't get a chance to get back to it yet. Scott McDonald. Dune Digger from Michigan. And there is Dana Barish and David. Sounds like they're on the road. So hopefully you guys are having a good trip out there and you have some decent cell reception. Jacqueline, good evening. Campfire 52. So hey, I've got some interesting stuff to talk about tonight. We'll see how it goes. I've got quite a few props here. I want to kind of walk you guys through how some of the techniques that I use for kind of analyzing a historic site, dating it, and determining what kind of activity happened there at a historic site. So we're going to go through that. I'm going to talk about some of the trash that I look for. Sean Squatch PNW, thank you, my friend, man. A little bit of cash in the gas fund. So that's good. I burned through some gas this weekend out there, that's for sure. So real quick, before we get started, right out of the gate, I wanted to do a huge shout out to DJ Hobbies Overland for a really awesome care package. If you guys see the new saw blade up on the wall up there, that piece of art, DJ Hobbies Overland sent that over. And I don't know, yeah, John, I see him on here, man. Good evening, my friend. Thank you. So not only did he send over that saw, which is really cool, and he sent a note, and inside the note he's saying that he hopes that I like that. And I don't know, man, why you ever would have thought that I might not like that. An antique saw with a cool old Homestead painted on it. Man, that's really like, it just doesn't get much better than that. So that's awesome, my friend. And not only did DJ Hobbies Overland send over the art and the saw blade, but also some California Highway Patrol patches and memorabilia for my law enforcement tribute deal that I'm working on. Also wanted to give a real big shout out to another guy, and I don't want to out his name because a lot of these guys would just as soon stay under the radar, but from the Department of Public Safety, the Texas State Highway Patrol, you know who you are, my friend. Thank you for the patch, appreciate it. And also the challenge coin, both from Texas Highway Patrol. So huge shout out to all the law enforcement and military guys that watch my channel. Really appreciate the support as always. And then appreciate the contributions to the law enforcement and military tribute wall I'm putting together. DJ Hobbies and Overland, a couple other gifts, pretty creative little care package that he sent over I thought was pretty awesome. Not only a couple of oh my God, packages of really delicious smelling coffee, Mountain Cabin premium coffee, some non-ground, some ground, that's good. As anybody that knows me knows that I pretty much fuel my life on caffeine. So that's awesome, John, DJ Hobbies at Overland. That's awesome, my friend. And then a little bit of a gag gift, but also a very, very useful gift for all of us. John also threw in the box a fire extinguisher, which is a great thing to have in a rig and a tent that you set up out there and obviously in your house. So thank you, my friend. Really appreciated the care package. That was pretty awesome. Another quick shout out I want to do to my brother Chad over at CK Knife and Tool. Chad went over the top and also sent me over he had his buddies from Ground Pounder Coffee send me over some coffee. Which the coffee I'm super excited about. You guys know that that I drink a ton of coffee, and I've heard this Ground Pounder coffee is really good. You can check them out. You can find them on Instagram, Google them, etc. So Ground Pounder Coffee. And then this is co-branded with CK Knife and Tool, which is awesome. For those of you that don't know, CK Knife and Tool manufactures the Coyote Works survival knife. Both versions of it. So we've got the full-size Coyote Works survival knife, and then we've got the Coyote Works Pop. Chad over at CK Knife and Tool makes both of them. So check out Chad at CK Knife and Tool and Ground Pounder Coffee. But something I'm really excited about, and I didn't realize that Ground Pounder Coffee even made, are these teas. So they got a nice black tea and a nice green tea. And if it wasn't about 75 degrees outside this afternoon, I would be enjoying a nice hot cup of Ground Pounder tea. So anyway, man, thanks to Chad, John from DJ Hobbies Overland, CK Knife and Tool, Ground Pounder Coffee, the guys from Texas Highway Patrol. You all know who you are. Also, wanted to do a shout out to my friends Nick and Sarah. Had a really great time meeting up with them on Friday night out in the Bear Creek area out here. And then thank you guys for the little gifts too. And I'm glad you enjoyed the spot up there. So having said all that, man, awesome to see you guys again tonight. So real quick, get a couple of the business items out of the way. As we go along here, if you have questions, I'll try to watch. Now that I'm doing this streaming thing, there is a little bit of a delay, but I try to pay attention to the comments over here. But definitely, if you want to get your comment out there, you can always use the super chats, the emojis, or the stickies, or whatever you call them on there. But just wanted to say thank you in advance for anybody that does any of the super chats or anything like that. As you guys know, I say this every Sunday and on almost every video, but really it's the super chats on these lives and the direct contributions to my PayPal donate link in the description of the videos down below, and then the Coyote Works merchandise sales through Lola Overland that really support my channel, prop it up. They pay for the cameras and the microphones and all those things, and more recently the stuff to try to set up and make these live streams go a little better. So hopefully those are going good. So let me take a quick peek here, but I think that's about all of the business stuff to get out of the way. Yeah, so guys, what I wanted to talk a little bit about was the one thing is as I go out in the field and I meet people and I take people with me on trips out there, one of the things that I realize is that there's a lot of people don't necessarily realize what they're looking at when they see signs of like the historic sites on the ground. And so to back up just a little bit, and I know most of you guys that are hanging out on these live streams with me know this stuff, but for me, a big part of overlanding is really going out there and exploring and finding these historic sites. I love tracking down the old homesteads, the old mines, all kinds of stuff like that. If you guys saw my Instagram post that I did for this live stream, the normal announcement for this, I was out most of the day yesterday metal detecting an old mine site and an old homestead site out there. So really for me, overlanding is a way that I get to really remote historic sites that not very many people see. But one of the things that's important is that for me, it's really important that I learn how to recognize those sites and that I learn how to interpret some of the stuff that I'm seeing there. Because to me, a big part of what's so cool about tracking down these historic sites is actually being able to uncover or imagine what the lives were like of the people who lived there, what the story's like. So, some of these sites are homesteads, and I always think about, that family that came out from Missouri. And Nick, thank you, sir. I appreciate it, my friend. Yeah, and now we'll go straight in the land fund, man. So one of the things that to me has always been really fascinating is the stories of the people that were there. So for example, on a Andrew, thank you, my friend. Awesome, man. Yeah, real quick, I just wanted to say, because Andrew left a comment and he said from the Ready Light to the Makita Saw, he's spent a few bucks based on my recommendations and have appreciated them all. And that's one thing I want you guys to know. for me is I depend on the gear that I use out there in the field, and that's one of the reasons why I always say, it's the super chats, the PayPal donate contributions from you guys, and then my merchandise sales and sponsorship through Lolo Overland that keep me going. And part of the reason that's the case is because I only use gear that works for me. I get offers from companies all the time that want to send me gear or want to pay me to use their gear, endorse their gear or whatever. But for me, it's like I have to pick the gear that's going to work for me for my adventures out there. So any of the stuff you guys see me using in my videos, man, you never have to question whether or not the only reason I'm using it is because it works great for my application. Doesn't necessarily mean it will for yours, but it does for mine. So anyway, having said that, going back to the topic at hand, so one of the things that I really enjoy is I enjoy putting together the stories of the past from the sites that I find. So whether it's a stage stop or a Pony Express stop or an old mine, one of the things that I was thinking about this mining site that I was at out there is that there was a period of time, kind of an interesting little period of time out here when there wasn't very much work, like around the Great Depression, and the mining became this thing that a certain number of people did that they could go out and do on their own. And it was hard work, but it was a way that without any money, they could stake a mining claim. And if they could even eke out a little bit of minerals out of the land, just enough to make enough money to eat, it was a way that they could live for a period of time. So a lot of times when people think of mining, what they think about is they think about people, earning a lot of money or getting wealthy or finding all these precious metals. But there was a period of time in the history, at least in this country, there was a period of time when basically what it was is it was a way for somebody who was completely broke and didn't have anything to be able to have a place to stay, and be able to have work, and be able to have a way to generate a little bit of revenue in order to survive through this really lean period of time in our country. And basically the way that worked is there was a mining claim system set up, and the mining claim system that it still exists today, and basically the way it works is if you locate some precious minerals out there on public land, you can stake a claim to those. You can file a claim, pay a very small amount of money. In some cases, you might have to have it surveyed or whatever. You can pay a small amount of money, and then you can have rights to extract the minerals off that piece of land. And the way this worked in the past for these guys who were really poor and destitute who chose to do this was you could go out there and stake a claim, and then you could stay on that claim as long as you were actively mining those minerals. So think about that. So that allowed somebody to be able to go stake a claim to a piece of government land where they could then build a ramshackle little cabin and stay for no money, right? For no money at all. So you think about like the Dust Bowl, and when all of those people moved out west looking for opportunities and things like that. That was one way that somebody could have a place to stay. And then if you could actually locate an area, it didn't have to be a rich mining claim. It just had to be enough to generate a little tiny bit of money, maybe just enough to be able to eat off of, because probably you would have a water source there and you just needed a little bit of revenue. And what's interesting is you go out and you look at all these mining sites, and even a lot of the old homesteads are this way too. And what you see is you see people, you can tell that they made do with very little. And whatever they had out there, they constantly repaired and modified. And you find this stuff all the time out there that has just been repaired and repaired and repaired. So having said that, like take for example a homestead, and most of the homesteads out here in the dry country in eastern Oregon, central Oregon, where I do most of my adventuring, basically, this was some of the last land that got homesteaded were these arid lands out in the west. And this was the land that was left after everything that was lush and green and everything had all been homesteaded and claimed. And there were still these last remaining arid lands, like, we're talking late in the homestead era, right? Like around 1900 and even shortly after there. So what happened was it was hard homesteading out in this country. And I oftentimes think about, like what was going on back in Missouri that family decided to pull up stakes and head out west. And what's interesting to think about is a lot of times when you read the stories, it has to do with freedom, them feeling like things were getting too crowded where they were, wanting to get out and really just have room to roam, which they also equated with freedom. So they came out west where there was still free land, and then I always think about, like, in my mind, there's this story where the husband kind of uproots the family, because that was sort of the tradition back then, is, generally speaking, he was the one that made decisions like that back in back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Loaded up the family, and depending on what era it was, by the early 1900s, some of them traveled out here by rail, but still into the 1800s, they were still traveling by wagon trains out here, like in the 1860s and all the way up into the 1860s and stuff. So they loaded up on a wagon train, took several months to make the journey out here, depending on how hard the trail was, or it might have even taken longer than that. Then they landed out here in the middle of the arid desert out in Central Oregon, which is just crazy to think about. To me, it's just amazing to think that they made that long, hard journey and then they landed out here just in the middle of this god-awful open country out here in Central Oregon. So that kind of sets the stage for a lot of why I'm so interested in the little relics and artifacts and stuff that are on the ground out at the site. So now, one thing that I always find interesting is that basically a lot of what's left at these old sites is what was the trash. It was those people's trash, right? And so having said that, that trash that they left behind ultimately tells us a lot about what their lifestyle was like or what was going on at that site. So there's a couple of things that I look for, and I thought I would just kind of share some of that with you guys. But one of the most common artifacts or relics that you can find out there are old cans and old bottles. And if you look up, like on those shelves behind me, those are all examples of old cans and bottles sitting up there. Some of those I've found at old homestead sites or in basements and things like that. So for a long time, so cans and bottles are two fairly common pieces of trash. They're at almost every historic site out there, and they provide some framework for kind of dating a site, so to speak. Now, the thing is, like, I've actually come to really appreciate cans more than bottles. And at first glance, you think about, like, cans are usually rusty. They're not quite as fascinating as bottles, but the reason why I find cans a more reliable and more effective way to get familiar with the site is because the bottles, so oftentimes, people have been bottle hunting for years out there. And so at this point, there's a very few bottles left out there, very few whole bottles left out there. So one of the things that I've kind of learned is as I've learned about cans and the different types of cans and everything. And one thing that I find is almost every place that anyone camped throughout history, all the way from the time cans were invented, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, there's tin cans out there. Like everything from the homesteaders to the cowboys who were out riding the range out here to the earlier explorers and the surveyors who built the roads, like almost all of them had some form or fashion of canned food. So cans you find almost everywhere. And up until the 1970s, when people started talking about, like, not littering, when that campaign started really evolving, up until that point, for the most part, people just left their trash where they consumed it, right? So if somebody stopped and had lunch and they had a can of chili or whatever for lunch, then they just left it right there where they had lunch. So having said that, there's cans everywhere. So when I'm looking for historic sites, one of the things I've always got my eyes open for are old rusty tin cans. And people that have ridden around in the desert with me will know that I'm famous for, I'll be cruising down, idling down a little 2-track road, and all of a sudden I'll hit the brakes, jump out of the truck and I'll say, hey, there's a can over there. And I'll go over, I'll walk over to that can, and then I'll start doing loops. Because when I find one piece of trash, there's probably more pieces of trash out there. And I can't tell you how many homestead sites, how many hidden and lost mines, how many old places that I found that all started because I spotted one tin can out there. And then I just started searching out from there. So, having said that, let's start chatting about these tin cans a little bit. Let me get a little drink here. My beverage of choice for the evening is a peach hint. Let me see. I don't know. Have I seen Oregon Mike show up on here? Is he with us? Let's. I just found a pretty cool picture here. I'm gonna try to show you guys really quick. Hang on, bear with me. I don't know what's going on here. There we go. That's not showing up very big. I just think that's a cool old picture of a couple of homesteaders, but it's pretty pixelated. Sorry about that, guys. I thought that was a little bit better picture. So we'll go back to talking about some tin cans here. Sorry about that. All right, so let me look at my notes here. All right, so basically, the whole process of putting food in tin cans was pretty revolutionary. You know, up until that point, there wasn't really much of a way. It was very difficult to be able to preserve food for any length of time, and the most reliable ways kind of before that were either like salting meat, or to a certain degree you could salt or dry like vegetables and fruits. Certain ones worked better than others. And then there was like smoking and drying meats, things like that. But really, when they first started canning foods, the whole idea is that they discovered that you could cook food and then remove all the oxygen and seal it off in an airtight container, and it would actually last for a decently long period of time. So the earliest that started was, I believe, Stephen Peterson. Thank you, my friend. The Find a Can Fund. I like that. I like that, my friend. Yeah, that's the truth, man. I look for a lot of them. So the earliest tin cans were around 1810 or so. Now, what's really interesting to think about to me is that when they first made tin cans, they actually made them by hand. They were all like hand soldered, hand shaped. There's very little manufacturing technology. So the process was really difficult, and so it wasn't very common. They weren't very widely used back when the whole process first started. So But after 1810, they started kind of developing the tin can technology. And what I'm going to show you guys is some of the earliest form of tin cans that you'll find out there. And this is, see if I can get some light on this. So what you want to look for here in these oldest tin cans is, check this out. We'll see if the camera can show this. But basically there's this ring right here, this wider ring. And that ring is soldered in to this lid. So this is obviously the lid off of a tin can. And you can see there's this one wide ring that's soldered into it. And then there's a smaller dot of solder in the center of it. So basically the way these worked is this lid was on the top of the can with this big hole open. And they filled it up. They put the food in through that big hole right there. And then they soldered that round plug in there, and then all that was left was a little tiny hole in the very center, right there. That tiny hole was left in the center. And then what they did was they cooked. Generally they cooked somehow, maybe in a boiling water bath or something like that. They cooked the food, and then when it was super hot, then they would put a little dot of lead solder in that hole right there, and that would seal it up. And then basically what happened as the can cooled down, it formed a vacuum, and and you know, as it cooled, it shrunk and formed a vacuum inside there, and that's basically what minimized the amount of air inside the can. I think I did a decent job of explaining that, hopefully. So, in fact, I think, let me see here if I have a picture. I actually found a pretty cool little diagram of that. So right there you can see a diagram of that oldest style of tin can. So you can see the outer ring there, and basically what happened, you can see kind of the whole process. So there was that outer can, that outer ring of solder, and then the inner ring. So something else about these older cans is, and here's an example here you can see, is even the seams on them right here were soldered. So this can was made by hand, which is pretty interesting, right? So it was all formed and soldered and everything by hand. So it was fairly labor intensive in the early days. So if you find these style of cans that have the inner and the outer ring, like these, chances are going to be prior to 1900. Generally speaking, they're going to be in that kind of era. So then as time went on, they were able to kind of come up with a little bit better technology. And so then you get into this little bit different kind of can here, where there's a kind of a crimp. This is a cap right here, and the cap is more of a pressed on design. And then in this can, you'll see there's only a single ring on a single solder dab in the bottom of it, right? So this can is a little bit newer than that earliest style. And another way you can tell is like the weight of those earliest tin cans is quite a bit heavier. They're quite a bit heavier and thicker. And then as time went on, the metal got a little bit thinner as they got a little bit better, as they had better technology for working metal. So for the most part, those early cans, whenever you see these lead solder marks and lead soldered seams on cans, those are going to be your old cans, and that's going to tell you that the site was probably, around 1900 or prior to 1900. Now, there are some exceptions to that, like the condensed milk cans. For whatever reason, they continued to use, or evaporated milk, they continued to use the same design with the single solder and this style of cap, right? So one of the ways that you can recognize that it might have been evaporated milk is by the fact that it's just got holes poked in it with a knife, right? So obviously it had to be some kind of a liquid. It wasn't going to be a food item if they could suck it through holes that big, right? Now, take for example, like here's an example of a can that was opened with a knife, but this had food in it because it had a much bigger opening in it. So obviously there was something chunky in here, food or fruit or something like that. So your earliest cans, you have these two rings of solder on them, or the dot of solder and the ring of solder. And there's a couple of different styles of that. For example, here is what was called a tapered meat can. And these cans had like corned beef, kind of canned meat inside them. Oh man, I got ants running all over. I must have had ants in one of these cans. That's fantastic. All right. So these were tapered meat cans. These tapered meat cans, these square ones like this, these came about in like 1875, I think. I wrote this down somewhere because I wasn't sure exactly when it was. Yeah, these tapered meat cans were around 1875 that they started doing these. So that gives you an idea. Now, what's interesting is a lot of people don't realize that cans are that old. So a lot of times when people see piles of tin cans, they just assume it's a little bit newer. So then what happened is right around 1900, they invented basically the style of can, similar style of can to what we use today, called the sanitary style can. And this one has what we're more familiar with, which is this lip on the end that's more like you can put a can opener on and it can catch, right? So this was a machine crimped and folded is how this was attached here. So as compared to this one, so you can see the one with the dot in it, with the solder dot in it, doesn't have a rim sticking up on the bottom, right? So this one is the newer one. This is the newer style sanitary can. Now this is an earlier sanitary can, so it's really thick and heavy. This is a very thick can. Like, I can't really smash this can with my hand. So that's another thing, you know, that this is an earlier one, like much older than, like, even say, you know, this Acme beer can, which is more like from the 1930s. So right around 1900, they invented this sanitary can, and this is one of the earlier ones, so this is probably closer to 1900. Now this style of can by about 1920 was the predominant one. So there are places where you're going to find both sanitary cans and the older style cans. You'll find them that existed within the same time period, right? So that window between about 1900 and 1920 could have both of those styles of cans in it. So having said that, you can narrow it down a little bit. Like if you know about things like the tapered meat can, you know, 1875 was when this was invented. And again, this has the two kinds of, the two solder levels to it, the ring and then the dot in the center. So, you know, that went away sometime shortly after 1900 in there. So a couple other things that are that you can pay attention to with cans that can help you out is these tobacco cans. And these I find all over the place, right? So this is a Prince Albert tobacco can. There are other kinds, but these Prince Albert ones are the most common ones. So they call these pocket tobacco cans, and these pocket tobacco cans were, try to get this in the light, these pocket tobacco cans were invented around, what was it, 1907. I was always thinking 1910, but I did a little research before this live stream and found out these were 1907. So Prince Albert in a can right here. Now I'm going to show you guys kind of a cool one that I have, which is what's cool about this one is, number one, you can see it pretty well, right? Look at that. Prince Albert, try to get it to focus on it. Now the back's not in great shape on this one, but what is super cool about this one is look at the detail on the man on it. Like, the artwork on that to me is just incredible, number one. But the second thing is this can has never been opened. So I found this underneath the floorboards, or kind of underneath the porch of an old homestead, and it's never been opened. And I don't want to shake it too much, but there's actually still the old rotted tobacco inside this, or I'm assuming. There's a little hole rusted in the side. It doesn't really smell like anything, but there's a plug of tobacco inside there, which I think is pretty interesting. So somebody was pretty bummed they dropped their brand new full can of Prince Albert tobacco. So 1907, these were invented. So if you're seeing these at a site, you know it was used after 1907. And then fast forward a little bit, and you have things like, let's see, I've got one of these up on the shelf behind me. Like right there is a Quaker State oil can. So that was not until like 1935 or something that they did those oil cans. I was Googling a little bit today, and I came up with one that said maybe as early as 1930 they did those metal oil cans. So another date, oil cans starting... my note here says oil cans in quart size first came out in 1933. So, and then in 1935 was kind of the beer can. And the reason why this is really important to remember is because there's a couple of things with the beer cans that make them really, well, prolific. Number one, right? A lot of people drank beer out there. But then when you get into the beer cans, the styles and everything change pretty rapidly. So once you get up into the 1930s and the 1940s, up into there, you get into what I call the era of the beer can. So now, the earliest beer cans were basically the sanitary style cans, right? So they have this lip on the top, and then something that I don't know how many of you guys even know this, but this style of opening, the earliest beer cans were basically just a can. They were the same as like a can of soup or anything else. So you needed a way to open them. So one thing that happened was around the same time that the beer can was invented, the something called the church key was invented. So, did any of you guys know what the church key is? I'm just curious, because we used to always call them this when I was young, and when I was young, they were everywhere. But basically, this is a church key. This has a pointy end on one side, which makes this hole in the can, right? So you take this church key, it hooks on the lip of the can, and then it smashes inside, and it makes that triangle hole right there. So I don't know how many of you have ever opened a can that way, but I'm old enough to have actually opened cans that way when I was young. So we always had a church key in a drawer everywhere, because there were still cans that came that, like I remember like tomato juice, tomato paste, a lot of things like that. So the church key has a triangle shape on one end, which makes these triangle shaped holes in the can. So way back in the day, like if you wanted to drink beer, you always had to have a church key on you. So these things you pretty much find everywhere in like old kitchens, glove compartments of old vehicles and everything. Church keys are all over the place. So these are, just remember kind of 1935-ish was this can and then the church key. So anytime you see a can with this triangle-shaped hole in it up there, right, that happened after the church key was invented. If it just has a rough opening like this, like prior to that church key being invented, mostly people opened cans with knives. So you'll find, jagged, square holes in them, things like that. It was around 1920-ish or so that the can opener, like with the two little wheels that opens a nice smooth circle around a can, that came to be in about 1920, but they weren't going to be very prolific at a lot of homestead sites at that time. But that's another indicator. If you find that can that's opened, nice and clean right around the edges, that that had to be like after the 1920s. Let's see. Oh, 1925. 1925, I made a note. So the first modern two-wheel can opener was invented about 1925. So any smoothly opened cans that you find were opened after that date. Now, when you think about it, even 1925, like that's almost 100 years ago now, right? So this was way later, like not until about 1960 was the aluminum beer can invented. Up until about 1960, all cans were still steel, metal, tin, stuff like that, right? Even the beer cans. So I've got kind of a cool thing. I've had this can for a long time, and I decided that I'm going to do something tonight with you guys on this live stream. So the earliest kind of aluminum cans had this ring pull on them, right? So there's this ring pull right here. So look at this can has never had the ring pull on it. What's interesting about this can is that it was opened with a knife in the bottom. So I have no idea why some old logger out in the woods or whoever, why they opened this beer can by cutting two holes in it with a knife in the bottom, as opposed to just pulling the ring tab. But one thing for any of you guys out here, any of my metal detecting buddies out there, I already see a couple of people, Jamie's saying metal detector's worst nightmare. So Oh yeah, so Sarah's saying that Nick was just telling her that the can opener was invented like 48 years later. Yeah, after the can. All right, so I've talked about these before in my videos. I've talked about like metal detecting and finding like detecting all of these like pull tabs, right? Well, this is what I'm talking about. These are the most these are the boon to all metal detectors. They're the most aggravating thing in the world. I don't know why they give such a great signal, but almost every time I find a pull tab signal, like I'm convinced it's going to be like a gold ring down there, and then you dig up this pull tab. And I don't know a single metal detector who hasn't dug a ton of pull tabs. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to actually pull that ring pull off there, because we also call them beaver tails, and I'll show you that. So yeah, I don't know. I've had this can for a long time, but here it goes. So you're going to pop it and pull it. So that's it. That is the ring pull. That's the classic beaver tail pull tab that we find all over metal detecting old sites. The thing is that's important to remember is these things weren't even around until about 1960. So now, having said that, silver coins were around until were manufactured through 1964. So one thing is even sites that have these pull tabs that are characterized by these pull tabs, which were made in 1960, they're still old enough. If you can find a pull tab, you know you're on a site that's old enough that you might actually find silver coins at too. So that's it, guys. That is the classic beaver tail pull tab. And I may have actually just pulled one of the last one known to man off of this can. So I hope you guys appreciate that. I'm going to save that. So that's the aluminum can. The aluminum can was 1960. So I'm going to pause for just a second here and see if anybody has questions about cans. And then I've got a couple other things to kind of throw in there. Oh, I see a few people talking about the P38s and the P58s. So P38 is a manual can opener for those that don't know. And I don't have one on me. I've got one in almost all of my kits and everything still. For those of you that haven't seen a P38, well, I don't know. When I was really young, they used to come in these military rations called C rations. They came in the ration pack, and and so they were a way to open up a can with just this tiny little aluminum, or sometimes they were steel little deal to open the cans. But they're in my mind, I guess there are more and more cans now that have some kind of a pull, a lid that you can just do by hand that you don't need a can opener for. But I still think, oh my God, Jacqueline says she has a full 6-pack of Billy Beer with pull tops. That's crazy. Dirt Bandit Outdoors says he has a video of his buddy finding a full beer can from the 70s and trying it. That's awesome. Oh yeah, so going back to these church keys, so the one side, the triangle side is the can opener, pokes a hole in a can, and then the other side is the bottle opener. So but it's funny because I wanted to show you guys one of those church keys, and like they used to just be everywhere, like I said. And then like I'm scrambling all over today trying to find a church key, and I'm like, when did that happen? That they didn't exist? Like, I mean, they were everywhere when I was young. So that's a little bit about the cans, and hopefully, Odie Slim's back, man. That's a little bit about the cans. Hopefully that wasn't too boring, but I just like to really encourage you guys to pay attention to that kind of stuff that you see on the ground, because the history is everywhere out there. Like, no, I mean, I find tin cans in places where you think people haven't been in dozens of years, out in the middle of the desert, in the most godforsaken, desolate places out there. So having said all that about the cans are really cool for kind of dating a site, but they're also really good for kind of determining what was happening at a site, or they're part of that puzzle too. So I wanted to talk about a couple of other things that I like. One thing is I mentioned briefly earlier the glass bottles. And while I rarely ever find whole glass bottles, one thing that I can't see if I can get some light on this. I don't know if you guys can tell, but this is kind of a bright blue piece of broken glass. So another thing that you can look for is you can look for this colored glass. Some people call certain colors of this are called depression glass. So when you find these colors, those colors were created by the mineralization in the glass, and some of them weren't necessarily this color when they were manufactured. They oxidized over time, or the mineralization in them caused them to turn these colors. So generally speaking, if you find these really deep colored glass, that's going to be kind of older too, in that 1920s or earlier, hence the name depression glass for that. Another thing that I really like finding is cartridge cases. And cartridge cases also are something else that generally will have some kind of a head stamp on or a caliber marking, so you can look it up and find out what era it's from. Couple examples of, one thing is, like, generally speaking, straight wall cartridges that aren't necked down. Like, this is an example of a straight wall cartridge right here. So most of the straight wall cartridges were earlier. Here's one. In fact, I was just up metal detecting a mine site yesterday, like I mentioned earlier, and I found a couple of old cartridges there. One is a 3855. So this 3855 caliber is a caliber that's any of those older calibers that have two numbers like that, like 4570, 4580, 5580, 2520, 3855. Any of those, the first number is the diameter in hundredths of an inch of the bullet or the caliber. So 0.38 or 3855 was a 38 caliber bullet, or 38 100ths of an inch in diameter, and it was loaded with 55 grains of black powder. So it was a 38 caliber bullet in a shell casing with 55 grains of black powder, was a 3855. A 4570 was a 45 caliber, 45 100ths of an inch in diameter bullet, propelled by 70 grains of black powder. Now, what happened is, not long after those calibers were out, they didn't always get loaded with, 70 grains of black powder or whatever, but that designation stuck with it. The 30-30 Winchester, which also was referred to as the 30 Winchester centerfire. So anyway, that's an interesting little piece of trivia, but cartridges are another thing that's kind of cool, because you can generally go back and you can look up what era they were designed, or what era they were manufactured. So I wasn't really familiar with that 3855, so after I found it metal detecting, or actually found a couple of them out there metal detecting yesterday, I came home and looked it up, and I found out that 3855 was invented in 1876. It was used primarily in Marlin rifles, but then later Winchester offered it also in their Model 94. But from 1876 on, it was predominantly a Marlin rifle caliber, and it stopped being in production to a large degree. There may be a few of them made here and there, but for the most part, production of it stopped around 1945, or the production of firearms chambered in that caliber stopped around 1945. So that tells me that whoever was shooting up at that mine site was likely shooting up there, sometime during that period of time. Now, just because they stopped producing firearms in that caliber in 1945 for the most part, doesn't mean there weren't still some of them around that people were shooting. So that's always something to keep in mind too. So cartridges, glass, the cans, all of those things kind of really give us a picture, or really tell us a lot about the site and what we're looking at there. I'll show you guys a couple other things, maybe. Man, now I have dirt all over everything from those cartridges. All right, had some pictures here. Let's see if I can get through those. Give me just a second here, guys. So, all right. So I thought I'd show you guys. I got just a few pictures up here. Another can that I find really fascinating are these ones that have the almost like the bucket style handle on them, and I find a lot of these out on the old Homestead sites. And I think I think one of the reasons why, so most of these were mincemeat cans or lard cans, but this I think is a great example of something. I'm pretty sure that the manufacturers of these cans like realize that propensity that the homesteaders and the people of that era had for reusing stuff. Because I find these cans like not in dumps. Like I think people continued to use them for other things too. So I just think that's another interesting little tidbit, is that I see these bucket handle style cans all over the place. Here's an example of one. Here's a peanut butter one. Again, a bucket style can. These were pretty popular for a period of time. You can see this peanut butter one here is more of the sanitary style. You can see that lip on the bottom and see this was the later technology. But these were relatively early technology, this lard can and this mincemeat can here. So those were manufactured pretty early on, and that would have made a pretty handy little bucket to have around a homestead. And then this was just, I thought was kind of a cool early picture of the label off of an old can. It's just fascinating stuff to me. Another image that I had in here. So this I had some questions about, so I just wanted to throw this up real quick. Basically what this image shows is this, Sarah Woodruff is asking a question. By the way, thanks for the super chat, Sarah. I really appreciate that. But Sarah's asking the question 556 in typical Sarah and Jamie fashion, the 556 number. So she's asking the question, what's my most prized artifact that I've ever found? And God, I got to think about that a little bit. I think one of the coolest things that I found is I found a rusty old Smith & Wesson revolver. And so that's probably, like, it's in terrible shape. It's rusted, almost to the point of, I mean, it's recognizable. You can definitely tell it's a pistol. It's like a break open Smith & Wesson revolver. You can tell that. But I think just because of the fact that I found it, at an old homestead site, or actually it was kind of a community site, a cluster of homesteads and a post office and stuff like that. So I definitely say that's one of them. Other than that, I couldn't really say, like, you definitely say that pistol is probably one of my more prized, I guess you could say. For the most part, I just enjoy finding whatever helps me kind of put together the pieces of the puzzle of what happened at that site. So I'm not super picky, man. I'm just happy finding old stuff, whatever it is. All right, so check out here, see if we got any questions. See, Jim Danielson mentioned that 4570 is still widely used today. I've actually always wanted that caliber. Oh yeah, so Craig Home, hey, good to see you on here, by the way, Craig. is asking if I've ever found an old firearm or pieces of one at a homestead area. So that's that old pistol I found. I did also find the kind of the side plate with the hammer on it of like an old muzzleloader rifle. I did find one of those. It may actually even be like really old. I don't know. It's also pretty rusted out, so it was hard to tell. Maybe one of these days I'll dig some of that stuff out and show you guys some of those. So one thing I was going to also show you guys tonight, let me just look at my notes here, make sure I'm not missing something. Oh, Craig, thank you. Thanks for the super chat, Craig. Really appreciate that. One thing I was going to talk a little bit about also is just some of the other stuff that helps me kind of uncover the pieces of a site. So one thing that happened out in this country is like around the time that most of the homesteaders, like by about 1920, most of the homesteaders had kind of starved out, and there was basically abandoned homesteads scattered out all across the desert in this country. And then not too long after that, the Civilian Conservation Corps came to being, and they came out, and I don't remember what year that was, but it was not too long after that. So the Civilian Conservation Corps came into being, and for those of you that don't know, the Civilian Conservation Corps was created kind of out of the Great Depression. It was a way to kind of put men back to work in our country and give them something to do, and also at the same time like make improvements to the country. So around here, the Civilian Conservation Corps was tasked with doing a lot of range improvement stuff. So we had there were several huge Civilian Conservation Corps camps. And one of the things they did in kind of efforts to improve the range out there, clean up the range, was they actually burned a lot of the abandoned homesteads that existed out at that time. So I share all that basically to say that at one time, they say you could look out across the Imperial Valley or look out across the Eastern Oregon Desert, and you could see a homestead on virtually every 1 mile section of land out there across most of the flat country out here. So having said that, there's these homestead sites everywhere, but in a lot of cases, they were burned in, like, say, the late 1920s or 1930s, they were burned. And that being the case, that's a long time ago. That's almost 100 years ago. So how would you ever know there was a homestead there if it had burned to the ground? Well, that's really where, like, looking for things like these cans and stuff comes into play. So what'll happen is I'll find a can on the ground, and then I'll look for other clues, and then maybe I'll find a spot where I see a couple of nails on the ground laying on a bare patch of dirt. So why would there be nails in the ground? Well, those nails are in the ground because they were in a building, and the building burned to the ground, and all the wood burned away, and then whatever was left of the wood, the charcoal all rotted away, and then what's left is all the metal of all the nails in the ground. So you can look at the nails, and if you see like larger nails, those are nails that were used in the construction of the home. But then if you find small nails like furniture tacks and stuff like that tells you, okay, it probably wasn't a barn, it was probably a house, because you're finding furniture nails in there. And then other things to look for. So having said that, when you find a pile of cans out in the desert, you don't necessarily know. Oh yeah, Melissa Hollister just left a comment and brings up an awesome point. So she says she likes finding old plantings like bushes, roses, fruit trees, things like that. So that's another thing that is a really good sign or a really good thing to look for around here. If you see rose bushes, usually out in the desert country where they're not native, if you see those rose bushes, that's an indication that someone planted those there. Another thing is Russian olive trees, poplar trees. There's several things like that really the only reason they would be there, they're not native to the area, is if they got planted. So if I come across, say, a pile of old tin cans out in the desert or some broken glass or something like that, I don't necessarily know there's a couple of things that it very likely could be. Now, one is that this is cattle. This was cattle and sheep country, right? So cattlemen and sheepmen ran cattle and grazed cattle all over this country. And basically the way that process works is usually there were cowhands or sheep herders in the case of sheep, but let's just talk about cattle. So usually how that worked is there were cowhands that sort of followed the cows around and pushed them around from pasture to pasture to pasture. And when I say pasture, I mean like grazed them in this valley for a little while, and then when that valley got grazed out, the cowboys would push the cows, maybe up over a little rise and down into another area, or up into another meadow where there was more grass or whatever, or push them to an area where there was another water source. So having said that, these cowboys and these sheep herders that were out there tending to these cattle, these herds of cattle and sheep out there, they camped all over the place. Now, over time, they kind of established routes, and they would camp, more often than not, they would sort of repeat these patterns. They would graze certain places in the spring, certain places in the summer, certain places in the fall, and then certain places in the winter. And so they'd kind of follow these patterns, and each sort of, big ranch or cattle outfit, had their sort of grazing areas that they worked. So in the course of pushing those cows around and grazing the country, there were cattle camps and sheep camps. In some cases, they even built cabins at camps or pastures that they used over and over and over and over again. In some cases, they just camped there over and over. And it's like us. If we go back to a campsite over and over, like we'll tend to make some improvements there. And over time, we'll build it up a little bit more. Still here, my friend. Thank you. I just saw the super chat pop-ups from Still Here, so appreciate that. Thank you. So anyway, so when you come across a site out there, some old tin cans, some old bottles, it could be a cow camp, it could be a homestead site. You don't really know what it was. It could just be an area where people camped while they were traveling through. So that's another thing, is we had all these historic routes. In fact, coming back to this picture right here, this picture shows basically the three historic routes, or three of the most major historic routes that traversed across Oregon. So that one in the center is the Willamette Valley Cascade Mountain Wagon Road, and you kind of see where it runs. You guys, you'll actually see a video of mine coming out where I find a couple of sections of that. You've got the Oregon Central Military Road. But basically there was also cutoffs and variations and shortcuts of those roads. And to make a long story short, people that traveled those roads, especially by horse or by wagon, they could only cover, maybe 10. If it was a single, like a person on horseback might be able to cover 25, 30 miles in a day or something like that. But for the most part, the going was relatively slow, and they made a lot of camps along the way. So when I stumble across a historic site that I don't have any history on, I don't know whether it's a homestead or whether it's a cattle camp or a sheep herder's camp, or whether or not it was a roadside stop along the way. So what I start doing is I start looking at what kind of trash I find there, and that helps narrow it down. And one of the things that really helps tell me whether or not it was a homestead site is if I find like things that would have been more precious to them. Like one example of it is china. And it's always amazed me that way out in the middle of this godforsaken rough country out there that these homesteaders traveled all the way to, how often I find china at the homestead sites. And the thing that I think about, and have read about this and stuff too, is like, there was a real propensity for them to want to take something beautiful, something that reminded them of opulence and comfort and better times and things like that with them. So, but that's an example of something that, if you were a cattleman or a sheepman and you were traveling on horseback and you had a bedroll tied across the back of your horse and a set of saddlebags, you probably didn't carry china to your cattle camp. So if I find pieces of china, I know that's more likely that that was a homestead site than a roadside stop or a cattle camp. So there's kind of things like that you can pay attention to that can really start to tell you a lot about what the use was at a site. So it was really interesting when I was metal detecting that mine site yesterday. I was going through the years of history there and everything. I found, basically the cans that told me that site at its very earliest had been occupied. I was finding trash from that very, early 1900, late 1800. I don't even know that it was mined then. I don't think it was mined until later, like until the 1920s or something like that. But having said that, it's not very far away from a little creek, and out in that desert country where there's water, there was activity. So going through all that, but then I eventually located one of the miners' cabins out there, or what was the site of one of the miners' cabins out there. And at that site there, I actually found some china, and then I also found a broken piece of a old, and I have it in my metal detector bag, but an old perfume bottle. So that told me that at some point, probably one of those miners had his wife up there, or maybe even lived there with his family. So anyway, just interesting stuff. I love putting together those clues and those pieces of the path, like of the past, like that. So let's see. All right, so let's see if we've got any questions coming up here. Yeah, Dave Holcomb's got some good comments on there you guys could check out. Good sign of a homestead site might be some derivatives of a house, yard plants, boxwood, holly, roses. And then of course that's going to be highly dependent on what part of the country you're in. Let's see what else we got going on here. Wait, Sammy Sam. All right, Sammy Sam. So looks like you might be familiar with some of the country around here. See, Sammy Sam's talking about Big Stick Road has many pieces of broken china along it. And that actually makes total sense, because that's a pretty historic road out there. Funny you mentioned that Big Stick Road. I was actually thinking about heading out that direction towards next weekend. Yeah, Scott McDonald brings up another point. I've never really done this, but I've heard this a lot. Scott saying that he dug up an old 1860 outhouse on his property and found old whiskey bottles, snake oil bottles, broken dishes. And I've read that a lot, that old outhouses are places where they put a lot of what at the time was trash, but is pretty cool stuff now. Wait till you guys see the outhouse I found out at this old mine site. It's like in pristine condition. Still here. Thank you, my friend. All right. So DJ Hobbies Overland is asking, do I still have a rifle buried? I do still have a rifle buried out there. Yeah, and I guess that's about all I can say about that. That's one of my series of survival caches that I have out there in the desert. Tucker's asking, do I ever see a pry open can? One that said pry open can trademark. Interesting. I'd have to see it to know exactly what you're talking about. And Oregon Mike brings up another good point. Anytime there is a large group of miners, someone starts a brothel near there. I think that's pretty historically accurate. Sarah's got a great question. Nick was asking how long it took me to get my Jeep loaded the way I wanted it. So that's a really good question. Basically, I think what Nick's asking about is like how long did it take for me to really get my loadout and everything dialed in the way that it is now? And I'm going to tell you the short answer to that is basically my entire life, right? So that's the short answer. Is it's just kind of constantly evolved through the years. I would say that really where my loadout that I run in my Jeep today, where it really started originating from was, it wasn't until about maybe 15 years ago that I started running that SUV style of vehicle. So yeah, I think it was up until then I had always run pickup trucks. So my loadout was quite a bit different when I ran pickup trucks. So around 2000 or so, let's see, I think my last Jeep TJ was a 2002. So after I had that, I had a Nissan Armada. and I don't even remember what year it was. I want to say maybe it was 2004 or something like that that came out. So that would be like 18 years ago. So when I got that Nissan Armada, that was my first SUV configuration vehicle, and that's basically when I started developing my loadout as it exists today. Now, having said that, for a long time I ran SUVs, and it wasn't until I got my Nissan Xterra, which was in, God, I don't know, like, I mean, that was like maybe like 8 years ago or 10 years ago, I got the Xterra and put a rooftop tent on it. So adding a rooftop tent to my vehicle, again, like pretty significantly changed my loadout. That took all of my Central Oregon adventure. What's going on, man? Glad you dropped in. I was just getting ready to talk a little bit about our trip planning session we had the other night. So anyway, going back to my loadout evolving to where it is now, once I added the rooftop tent to the vehicle, what that really changed is after putting a rooftop tent on a vehicle, I no longer had sleeping gear that I had to store in my vehicle, right? Because now my sleeping bag, mattress pad, pillows, all of that sleeping gear basically goes up inside or is part, the rooftop tent has a mattress built into it. And then I leave my sleeping bag and everything up there. So I would say, Nick, probably really about 10. I know this answer is getting long. Sorry about that, man. But I would say really started evolving about 8 years ago, somewhere around that ballpark, 8 to 10 years ago, to where it got to today. Now, having said that, like, I think there's a lot of guys, I mean, even myself included, that have pretty dialed systems that make a pretty good starting point. I don't think that probably anybody else in the world would want to run a setup exactly like mine. Like, everybody's got to kind of adjust it to fit them, but it's a hell of a good starting point, right? Like, you can look at my loadout, or someone can look at my loadout who wants to camp in a similar style, set their rig up the same way, and they're going to be 70% of the way there. They might want to, there might be a few things that you want to dial. Craig, man, thank you, my friend. Matt S., what is up, brother? Good to see you on here. And JL2 Off-Road again, man. God, we got the whole Red Mexican Hendrix is on here. We got the whole crowd, man. It's good to see everybody. See what other questions we got on here. Yeah, the whole thing about the loadout is, I would say that the two things that play the biggest factors into what your loadout looks like is what your mission is. Like I've always kind of I always kind of operate based off this philosophy that I let my mission dictate what equipment and gear and everything that, what my loadout's going to be. All of that is dictated by what I'm trying to accomplish, right? So I sort of work backwards. What am I going to do on average on my trips? What is it that I want to do? And how do I want to do it? And what gear do I need in order to be able to accomplish that? So I just find for me that it's easier to kind of work backwards like that. Jamie, my friend, we do need to have a slumber party in the Oahe soon, man. Definitely. Pillow fights, tickle games, FLIR, some night vision, shooting our ARs in the dark. That was pretty fun. I was just watching the videos the other day. The last time Jamie and I were down in the Oahe country, he brought one of his ARs and he had a night vision scope on it that had a camera built into it or attached to it or something. So we were shooting that at night and recording the video. And I was just on our Google Drive watching that video like 2 or 3 days ago. Yeah. Oh, Randy H is asking, what do I think about those 4x4 Sprinter van conversions? I see them all over Oregon. I mean, I think they're awesome. I think they're awesome in the same way that I think like RVs are awesome and motorhomes are awesome and everything. I mean, the Sprinter vans to me seem like they're like sort of a cool middle of the road solution between like the mobility of like a Jeep or a pickup truck, and they sort of hit that in between, like in my mind, like the continuum is like The reason why I run like a Jeep and a pickup truck is that's highest mobility, highest capability, highest flexibility out there on the trail, right? There, that is a system that's adaptable. Mark Taniguchi, my man, good to see you again. Thank you, sir. Um, the so in my mind, that's the continuum, right? You start with your single vehicle, four-wheel drive vehicle, your Jeep, your Bronco, your pickup truck, whatever it is, and that's your highest degree of mobility and flexibility. And then, but also your lowest degree of comfort and equipment, right? Like that sort of like, you go from backpacking to a single vehicle setup to maybe like a vehicle with a bug out trailer is kind of the next level, or an overland style trailer is the next level. And then to me, the next level above that is the Sprinter van conversion, kind of that ballpark. And then after that, you've got your full on RV, camp trailer, etc. So I think the Sprinter vans are awesome. I've seen some really, really nice ones. They look very comfortable. Definitely they are not going to go the places where my Jeep goes or even my truck goes or things like that. I mean, I don't even think like where Nick and Sarah and I were, like, I mean, you're not gonna take a Sprinter van up into that country in there. But having said that, if I was doing more road trips and, a lot of the desert country, a lot of the places, even like you think about going through northern Nevada and Death Valley, I mean, a lot of those places have pretty accessible roads, and a lot of that country's flat with not a lot of real, I mean, there's a lot of places you can go and in a Sprinter van and have, pretty amazing comfort while you're doing it. I mean, that's pretty luxurious to be in a Sprinter van, in my mind. Let's see, what else do we got? Yeah, Tucker's saying, but they cost about as much as a full-size RV. That is true, man, or even more, I think. Um, yeah, I know. Yeah, and Sarah Thang saying that she saw like four of those vans when they were out here over the weekend. Yeah, I see them. I mean, they're getting so popular. I see them all over the place. Oh yeah, sorry, I left out my buddy Lummox Overland Adventures, man. Yeah, I forgot about the flatbed camper. That's a pretty sweet setup, actually. That is like the setup that hits like right in between your pickup truck with a canopy or your Jeep with a rooftop tent and your Sprinter van, which is probably like the next level of comfort that I'll go to at some point. Is more like, and I don't know that I'll do a flatbed because obviously I don't have a flatbed truck, but I'm thinking like the next level of comfort for me is potentially, throwing like a pop-up camper on the back of my grandpa's truck, and running that on the back of the Vernlander. Where I haven't seen my Lola Overland buddies on here tonight, by the way. Um, let's see. Oh yeah, I see Bill Lowry just made a comment about sprinters being boat anchors, and I missed the rest of the conversation. But that is one thing about them, is they are heavy, and especially if there's anything soft, like in the spring in this country, man, a heavy rig can be a pretty serious liability. Oh yeah, so Sarah's saying, by the way, new rooftop tent, amazing. So her and Nick got the high country, and I was wondering, yeah, I was curious how you guys' night was in that, if you guys liked it. Otis Campers, Ole Johnson said Otis Campers, and I've heard of those. I'll have to actually look it up. Black Pearl Voyager is on. Hey. Um, by the way, Black Pearl Voyager, they just got back from a trip to Moab, and I saw a new YouTube video pop up. So you guys go check out my buddy Ted over at Black Pearl Voyager. I haven't watched it yet, but it's on my list for tonight. I'm going to check that out, see how his spontaneous trip to Moab went. Dana, Diamond Divas Pure Romance, Dana Barish asked the question, have I kept records of every homestead that I ever found? So yes, in the sense that I have photo and video documentation of every Well, not every one I've ever found. I would say every one that I've found or been to in about the last 10 years I've documented. So, um, I'm trying to actually kind of get that more systematized too, but I do have labeled photos and videos and things like that of all of that's one of the things that really drives me. And I don't know if I've mentioned this to you guys before on these live streams, but Dana, to your question, one of the things that really feeds the fire, keeps me motivated to go out and find them has been the fact that over the course of the last 10 years of my life or so, I've really realized how fast they're disappearing. Like, I can't even tell you guys how many homesteads that I took for granted for many years of my life were standing homesteads. In fact, it used to be relatively common for me to be out in the desert for a couple of day trip, and like occasionally I would just spend the night in a homestead, or I knew where certain ones were that were still like in good enough shape and everything that you wouldn't mind just spending the night in them. In fact, that wasn't that uncommon. Like, there were people here locally that we knew, the old such and such homes, the old Smith homestead out, Bear Creek or whatever is a great place to spend the night in a thunderstorm. I used to like run around in my Chevy short wide box pickup truck, and a lot of times I would just sleep on a cot out in the open, right under the stars, or even just right on the ground on a mattress pad, on a bedroll on the ground. And so, if it looked like there was an afternoon thunderstorm coming in, I would go hit a homestead and maybe crash in the homestead for the night just to have a roof over my head. But they're disappearing, and I mean, at this point there's hardly any of them left standing. There's a few of them across the state, a small handful, but many of them that were in really good shape for a long time are gone. So yeah, I'm definitely kind of on a mission to find as many of them as I can that there's still visible remains of, and document those. And I don't know, I don't know what I'll do with it someday. I don't know if I'll do like a feature length history film on it. I've thought about that before, where I might just do like an entire like documentary film that's just a whole series of homesteads all across Eastern Oregon, and whatever history I know on each one of them. I actually have been, putting footage in the can for something like that. That would be a lot of editing. That would be a really big project and everything. But, maybe that's something for when I retire. I'll be able to take all this footage and then build something like that. That's basically like the most expansive, the single movie, the single video that's like the largest volume of Central and Eastern Oregon homesteads out there, the catalog of them. So, yeah, I don't know. All right, what else? Let's see. Sounds like there's actually some people who might be interested in seeing that. Oh no, Jacqueline's asking if you get a story tonight. I don't know if I really have one on my mind. Maybe somebody that's on here that knows me can think of one. Tell me. Yeah, my buddy Mark Taniguchi is saying for my next mission, write a book. I actually have been working on a book. It's total post-apocalypse fiction, but I don't know. I want to say maybe I've got like 100 pages. I'm like 100 pages in or something like that. I work on it a little bit more in the winter, but that's a pretty cool. I think it's a pretty cool story. I'll put it out there at some point. Oh wait, I missed something here. Or oh man, so Oregon Mike saying he wants me to tell a story about a skunk in the garage. I wonder if you mean the skunk or the oops, hang on. See, look at that, guys. I actually hit the mute button on the microphone again, but I caught it this time. Oh man, occasional overland Mike. Oh, so that reminds me, man. Thank you, man. Kicking a couple of bucks into the here's to retirement and documentaries, man. So, I did want to tell you guys that I am getting pretty excited about this. So, the core group of us, so it's myself, occasional Overland, Mike, who some of you know, you guys have seen Mike's his Chevy Colorado ZR2 with the Alu-Cab canopy camper on my channel. So, it's myself, Mike, John, who is another friend of ours. We all met each other kind of through work and stuff. John's got a full-size truck. You guys have seen a couple of pictures of him on my Instagram. We did a trip not too long ago that we actually met Tucker out in the field. So you've got me, Mike, John, and then another buddy of ours, Kevin, who's been kind of like me, tracking down old history out here his entire life. We had our first official planning meeting last week, and we are now, Wednesday night I think was our first official planning meeting. We all shared notes and everything, so we are now in the thick of planning step one of our search for the lost Blue Bucket gold mine. So we've identified the area where we're going to make our first trip into. Our first priority is to be able to intersect. What we want to do is we want to intersect and verify the location of the wagon train, where the wagon train got to at one point, because it was sometime after that point in the wagon train's travels where the legend has it that they discovered the Blue Bucket gold. So our first priority is to get boots on the ground and confirm the location of the wagon train at a point shortly before they located the Blue Bucket gold. And then what we'll do is we'll start working our way. We'll basically start following the route of the wagon train and looking for locations or signs of the actual Blue Bucket gold that they found along the way. So I'm really excited about that. We'll bring you guys into the process a little bit more. I've had a couple of other people express interest in being a part of that, so there will definitely be opportunities for that. I think you'll see the four of us as kind of the core group, and then we'll bring in other people. There's definitely some areas where we're going to need some bodies to do some metal detecting and some stuff like that. So I'm really excited about that. This will be a long project. You know, we're all relatively busy, so we won't be able to devote a ton of time to it. But but we will. But we will be working on that, and you guys will see more. We're actually trying to do some video of even some of our planning sessions and everything, so we can kind of bring you guys in on what that process looks like too. A lot of map recon, a lot of research, and then using a lot of deduction and theories and everything, as well as like coupled with, you know, like myself and Kevin have some really boots on the ground, intimate knowledge of the country and how it lays. So there's some geographical constraints that kind of dictate where wagons would and wouldn't go. So, yeah, man, I'm excited. That's I've been doing a little research every evening. I did do a video, by the way, of metal detecting that old mine site, and I think you guys will enjoy that. I've had so many people ask questions about the metal detecting, I thought I'd just break down. One of the reasons why I haven't done more metal detecting video is, I'm just going to tell you guys up front, like, by no means do I consider myself an expert or even really very competent at metal detecting. I've had a decent metal detector for, you know, I don't know, 10 years or something like that, and have used it off and on, but like I'm nowhere near, like there's guys like Dirt Bandit Outdoors on here, like, I mean, that guy is like metal detecting all the time, has a great machine, you know, knows what he's doing and stuff. So that's one of the reasons why I haven't done a lot on metal detecting. I just feel like there's some awesome people out there that are really good at it, and I feel like, you know, that's not where I'm at a expert professional level at. Like, I don't know if any of you guys that are listening have ever done anything like a martial art, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or whatever, but I did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a long time, and there's a belt system in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So, like, I compare everything in life, like, to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu belt system. So, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like, a blue belt is like your first belt, and I think this has changed a little bit now, but like when I first started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like a blue belt, I mean, that was like a pretty big deal to get your blue belt. It was going to take you a couple of years. I mean, a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the time was real similar to like a black belt in a lot of other martial arts like Taekwondo and karate, you know, you were going to spend 2-3 years training regularly to get that blue belt. And then you'd go on up through the blue, purple, brown, black as basically the rank system in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's just those 4 belts. So I tend to compare everything in life. So I say like at overlanding and stuff, I'm like a 2, I would say I'm like a 2 to a 4 stripe black belt when it comes to camping, overlanding, outdoors, bushcrafting, that kind of stuff, right? Been doing it my whole life. I'm literally as comfortable out in the woods underneath a pine tree as I am sitting right here in my living room, right? In fact, sometimes I feel like I'm a little more comfortable out there. So I'm definitely like a 2 stripe, maybe even like 2 to a 4 stripe black belt at that. At metal detecting, I'm like maybe just about ready to get my blue belt. Like I'm just starting to get to the point where I feel like, you know, I'm decent at target identification and can find some cool stuff with it. So having said that, I do realize that a lot of people have been interested in seeing that aspect of my searches out there. So thought I'd break down and do a video on it. And I actually had a pretty good time doing the video about it. I mean, obviously you guys can tell I really like that whole putting together the pieces of the past. So to me, the metal detecting is just another way to find other cool little stuff. In fact, I don't want to spoil the video all the way, but just to give you guys a little bit of a taste of it, one of the things I found that's really interesting is I found this smashed. It's basically like an old, now, having said that, this isn't necessarily related to the mine, but this is basically like kind of a, just shortly after the Civil War era, lead, kind of like a round ball or a, I forget what they call them, but they're basically the those earlier bullets that had the rings on them, and it's pretty smashed up. And I don't know if you guys can see in the light here, but it's definitely a big lead bullet with 3 rings on it. So if anybody knows what era the 3 rings are, let me know. Hey, Dave Holcomb just left a comment saying, for ultimate diesel fun, check out a Chevy Brigadier. Huh. Okay, so old 118 Grunt is saying mini ball. Ole Johnson, mini ball. And Jason Neal saying mini ball. Okay, so that's what I thought. I just didn't want to jump to any conclusions too quickly. So that's pretty cool, actually, that I found this at that site, because there's some other history that went through there too that had to do with the cavalry exploration of the area, the military exploration of the area. So I'm thinking this might actually be more left over from that as opposed to the later mining activity in the area there. So pretty cool stuff. Oh man, Jamie said shurikens, like throwing stars. And Oregon Mike says you need to ask Aqua Chigger. Yeah, see, that's the thing, man. That's why I don't do metal detecting videos very, or haven't ever before, because there's guys like Aqua Chigger out there, man. I mean, that guy's not only like just laid back and chill and cool to watch, but I mean, he's just been doing that for a long time. So definitely, Asa, always got to be ready to go ninja. All right, what else, guys? So R Black says, oh yeah, because I just showed you guys that. So R Black says, mini ball, officially it is a mini bullet designed by a French military officer. And I think I had actually known that at one point. That's a good little piece of history there. Oh, wait, now our Black is saying, sorry, the bullet that I have is a Burton bullet. All right, so now I'm going to have to Google a Burton bullet. Unless you're going to tell me, man, our Black, if you can leave a comment on there and give me a short little history on the Burton bullet, or at least what era it's from. All right, guys, what else? Any other questions or anything? I think we are pushing, holy smoke, 7:35. Man, time flies when you're having fun. We're already an hour and a half into this, so let's see what's going on here, actually. Spelled actually minor ball. All right, Jawbone Crusher. When is the next trip? I feel terrible about this, guys, but I'm gonna put you off. I have something this week. I have an appointment this week, and hopefully in that appointment, I'm gonna get my last kind of critical date thing that's gonna come up for the spring nailed down, and then I'm gonna be able to finalize my date for the Coyote Works group overland trip, and what I'm almost as excited about is I'm going to get to finalize my dates with Brad from Trail Recon and Marco from Overland X. I'm doing a trip. Man, I've been messaging with those guys. We have been talking for almost 2 years, I realized, about getting together for a trip. And we are definitely going to make it happen this spring. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to that. Both super cool guys that I've been watching for a long time. And I think we'll really have a good time hanging out together. So you guys got to give me just one more week. Hopefully by next Sunday I'll have a date lined up. I've got everything kind of ready to go for the at least for the initial kind of Coyote Works group trip. I've got a place lined up. Everything's just kind of waiting on me to come up with a date. So my apologies for that, but we will get it figured out. And I think with that said, I think that's about it, man. Let's God, I sure appreciate the support from you guys tonight. I just want to say, if anybody's interested in cool Coyote Works merchandise, like this badass black Coyote Works hoodie I'm wearing, all of this stuff is available at Lolo Overland. Again, if you want to make monetary contributions to my channel, really the two ways to do that are the super chats or the stickies here in these live videos, or direct contributions to my PayPal donate link that's in the description, all my videos down below. I try to shout out all of the contributors to the PayPal donate on my videos, the video in between when they made contributions. So man, I just really appreciate that support. I'm having a great time doing this. Hopefully you guys are learning stuff and enjoying it. I really enjoy these Sunday evenings hanging out with you guys. It's getting to be kind of the thing that I just sort of look forward to. Even all weekend long, I'll start thinking about it when I'm coming back in from the desert from my last trip. So you guys are awesome, man. I really appreciate I want to do a shout out again to DJ Hobbies Overland, Sarah and Nick for the gifts, Chad from CK Knife and Tool. Thanks again for the coffee, the patches, everybody out there in law enforcement and military. Appreciate what you guys do for our country, for our communities out there. And yeah, man, it was awesome hanging out with you guys. Big group hug. I see Jamie's trying to organize a group cuddle. He always has to take it just a little bit further than the normal. Yeah, man, really appreciate it. Scott McDonald, Jacqueline, always a pleasure. Lummox Overland Adventures. Josh Rue, good to see you again, my friend. I didn't notice you there. Mark Taniguchi, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Red Mexican Hendrix, man, always look forward to seeing you. Dude, really appreciate the support from all of you guys. And man, I hope you guys all have an amazing rest of your Sunday evening. Odie Slim, good night, my friend. Thank you all for the super chats tonight, the contributions. Hit me up with any questions, as always, in between, man. If you guys hit me with direct messages on Instagram or comments on this video, I'll do my best to talk about or answer whatever questions you guys want. Odie Slim, Scott, later, my friend, Oregon Mike, thank you for doing an awesome job with the moderating, as always. And yeah, man, you guys have a fantastic rest of your Sunday evening. I appreciate it. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Until then, Coyote Works, out.